time when I built that, they were just theorizing about black holes. They hadn't found them. When I made that, that's what that was. It was a black hole. Yeah, now they've just discovered, or they're just again saying that the Big Bang is actually just a black hole, and the whole universe is pouring out of it. But it's pouring into the same universe that we're in, or it's all one universe. Like,
Thank you. Like original Ben. I have a picture with Lloyd. He did a really silly, and Kieran. He's like,
There's another one.
He's going to be.
Got it.
video.
Yeah, that's a nice shot too.
Just gonna keep that on her all evening.
It doesn't really show that I was going to say something about it.
Because you've got the levels. They go down.
Yeah, there's another interesting thing about that room too. That no matter where you sit in it, you feel higher than the other person.
It's true.
It's an optical illusion.
Yeah. How'd you do that?
Feeling higher than
Thanks for coming. Okay, I'll start again. But so Lucy, I just decided to show some sort of background, previous work slides, and was hoping for maybe a lively conversation when we could talk together. I anticipated there might be a few questions of maybe how I ended up here, which we can talk about, and a few other things that might come up. But we can do all of that in maybe a bit of a conversation as well. But I just thought I had to start somewhere, so I present a series, probably the first series, which is semi-finished, that I developed while doing my Masters in London. So I'm from London and went to the Royal College of Art for photography. And I began to develop this methodology of using performance, of using myself in the photographs, not 100% of the time, but often. And basically often picking a place to study, which was, until now, normally a house to look at over a period of time. And it's sort of in a British, English house with a very that precise identity, and it's playing with
clothes, decor, the sort of atmospheric of this particular house, playing a bit on the fairy tale, and I was very interested in scale of the body in relation to the space. And when I come back to it, when I think about it in relation to the Hornby work, what seemed to happen a lot of these pictures is just this body sort of going a bit. So the body is sort of misbehaving and going astray in this sort of very particular British house. But what interested me a lot when coming to Hornby was what seemed to be happening in all of these pictures was a big sort of tension. Was the body in architecture being slightly out of joint? You know, it's a lot about constraints and sort of psychological things going on, maybe motivating me with the pictures. So I'll go back to it when we look at the Hornby work, but for a moment I found that a huge change because the building style here seems very welcoming to the body. It seems to be made with a different sort of rationale, so to speak. And I was always quite interested in people using themselves in their work quite performatively. Again, just by chance, a friend's mother lived in this area in North Wales. There's this huge sort of, I think it's 16th century, my history, but it's a Jacobean mansion, and they do tours there on a Sunday, and it's supposed to be the most haunted house in North Wales, and that's it from the aerial view. I got the cover image, which is nice, but this is the series that I did in the haunted house. And it was more to do really, not really using any blurs or anything, but to do with echoing the space or the sort of styling, the fact I'm using sort of net curtain, you know, a bit like a child making themselves into a ghost, that sort of thing. Or also the idea of doubling. She had some amazing paintings, and in this fireplace, you can't see it on the small print, it had pentagrams carved into it to stop witches coming down the chimney. So I like this, I just liked all these touches and these sort of echoing things that happen. This painting apparently is it's a copy of a Rubens, but by a student of Rubens. So I think that's her sort of best. So I was just thinking about this idea of doubling, because I didn't do any of this sort of trying to haunt or trying to float about or blur. But when I was reading it, there's a brilliant writer called Marina Warner, and she writes all about folklore and strange customs and things. And she had this one book about metamorphosis, and she talks a lot about photography itself being bound up sort of with the occult, and even just the fact that you're doubling things and you're making things come alive. You know, you have the relationship between time and death, and we look at pictures of dead loved ones and this kind of thing. You know, the figure of the double, the idea of an uncanny double and creating different figures. So she's really talking about the root of photography itself. Used to be bound up in a lot of superstition and doubling, and I thought that was quite interesting just to think about at the time. And this one, for example, in the frame, it was a memento mori, so it's a pre-photographic sort of photograph, and so it's all made out of human hair, this elaborate shape, and sort of shells and butterflies. And the chaise lounge would also be stuffed with hair. So I always call this the hair picture, with the hair and hair and hair. And so it's all to do with sort of collecting and death in a way, in a mild way. And again, maybe playing with scales. I used to put these two together sometimes, because that often happened with figures, just becomes too big for the space. And I think that's how little intricate spaces just generally make me feel as well. So. And then Hornby.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Lights for this image. I don't know if it's really doesn't really do her writing justice, but I think that's just an example of often titling. It's just a way to maybe reference the things that I was sort of thinking about, and at the time, a couple in here that didn't make it into the book sequence, but again, the sort of idea of finding spots and returning from different weathers and looking at them over time was really useful before going back. Many of them together with Quanah sort of shows a lot of the spots and identified them and walked and looked at them. It's brilliant having that time and going back to them. So this was again, I found the book Builders of the Pacific Coast, Bob Kane's stairwell, so I actually just phoned him up following seeing that and asking him if I could go up the staircase. This one, I mean, I'd photographed that look a lot in '99 with Thomas, and it always really struck me that this looks like a skull. And I didn't even really notice that this underneath now looks like a figure as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's so...
Portugal. Well, Mark Cousins, he is head of critical theory at the Architecture School in London, Architectural Association, and it was quite a laconic essay. He's very theoretical and trained psychoanalyst and things. So we had a series of lunches for about a year talking about the work. So in the end, he doesn't write anything down. He does these lectures every week on a Friday, just really fluidly with no notes or anything. So when it came to doing the essay, I had to type it as he recited it. 500 words or 600 words, and is that it? You know, after, it's short. But he's very interesting and talked about the work because he's really, really curious and engaged with the relationship between me and the camera and the space, that kind of dynamic. And in this image, what's revealed, what's concealed, looking and not. And in a way, to him, because of the previous work I sort of showed always using a similar methodology, he sort of focused a lot on the fact that that's happening in each series. And in a way, all of the Hornby is to him, I mean, he loves it, it's just stuff, you know, to him that's not where he's really focusing it. He calls it a diagram, you know, between the artist and the camera, the geometry of that space, I suppose he's talking about in that essay. I can't think what else he says in it in a way, because he talks about a feeling of intrusion and self-intrusion into these scenes. As if, Facilia was wonderful, Facilia Caton, because I met her on Hornby in '99, very briefly, daughter of Elaine at the bakery, so she was born here, and that was so amazing that she came to London. She's just completing an MFA in curating at Goldsmiths, working at a photographer's gallery, and it was just wonderful because I wanted to say, I suppose it was that whole dynamic of, I didn't really know, I was actually going to portfolio reviews and things like that with the pictures, and I would ramble on to people about Hornby and the community and the people and wonderful and all of these things, and people would point out, well, the community isn't really in these pictures, you know? So it would end up being a strange thing. So it was always difficult for me, how much do I tell about the island, how much is it, and having Priscilla as an inside, having, you know, she sort of described the island was wonderful to me, because...
Did she write the blurb on the very back cover? Because that's quite descriptive of Hornby in a nice way.
Okay. No, she didn't write that actually. I did that with the editors, she's a skier. But I loved it, you know, she's the wave of Back to the Land visionaries, her parents, and she acknowledged the First Nations history and the pioneer farmers, and you know, I just felt that she had the voice to describe it. You know, I was going around these, so she also talks about, the thing that she talks about is when using, for most of the images with me, I used clothes from the free store, and like in the other houses, I was often using clothes that belonged to the spaces. So she talked about this sort of urge to assimilate through fabrics, and I suppose trying on the very fabric of the island in that sense, and trying to merge, and I really like that. And she also talked about space. Space is landscape, as a framing, or do spaces make us, or do we make them? And so again, her essay is really succinct, but I think there's a lot there. I was really happy with hers, called Surrounded in Some Way. Yeah. The film director Wim Wenders. I haven't seen all of his films actually. I'm always telling students to read this, and I realise I hadn't actually read it myself for ages. And he's got a photo book called Once, and he's got a beautiful poem in the beginning called To Shoot Pictures. And basically, I think all this kind of theory and philosophy and deep thought is in it, but it's beautiful to read because it's just written so well as a poem. And I think the thing that it says to me, and you could get it elsewhere a lot from a lot of other photography writing, but he's talking about how the photographer is always implicated within their frame, you know, even if they're not physically in it, or even be a portrait of somebody else, but you could still call it a self-portrait. And I think he puts it in such a nice way. So there's a tiny bit from here I was going to read, and he talks about, so he says, it's commonly assumed that so I'm not a brilliant reader. It's commonly assumed that whatever's captured in the act lies in front of the camera, But that is not true. Taking pictures is an act in two directions, forwards and backwards. Yes, taking pictures also backfires. And he starts talking, I won't read that bit, but he's talking about a comparison with a hunter. He's saying with a rifle, they shoot a rifle and it also backfires. So he talks quite poetically about releasing the shutter and being thrown back on yourself and out. So I think the summary of that is where he says, he talks about, so just as the hunter is not struck by the bullet, but only feels the recoil of the explosion, the counter-image contained in every photograph is not actually captured by the lens, yet it remains somehow inextricably linked in the picture as an invisible impression of the photographer. And he says later, so the rifleman's recoil corresponds to the photographer's portrait that is more or less visible behind the picture, only instead of capturing his or her features, it defines the photographer's attitude to whatever was in front of him or her. The camera is therefore an eye capable of looking forward and backward at the same time. Forwards it does indeed in fact shoot a picture. Backwards it records a vague shadow, sort of an X-ray of the photographer's mind, by looking straight at his or her eye to the bottom of his or her soul. Yes, forward a camera sees its subject, yet backwards it sees the wish to capture this particular subject in this first place, thereby showing simultaneously the things and the desire for them. I think that's a really key point, just things. I recently saw the curator who helped me organise the book from Italy was passing through London and to see all the graduate shows from the Royal College and such, and he said, that's really old-fashioned. People aren't doing this even kind of landscape, straight-ish kind of photography anymore.
Was old-fashioned a nice term or not?
I don't know, because you hope that maybe that will, maybe you could be unique if you stick to your guns or something, because it's become very in London, loads of collage and people are photographing things and re-photographing them, making an installation, sort of having to push, because it's hard when you say genres, it's that feeling that maybe why take another landscape that's been done, so what can I do? Can I make an installation? And so but in a sense I think photography might just become assimilated with all the other practices. It might not be a thing on its own anymore, different genres, which could be good. I did work together with Connor Parker here, whose kitchen and fabulous house I used a lot in the images as well, because I use this motor drive and infrared firing thing for the camera, so I can stay in a moment and keep shooting the camera off and do different things without having to go back to the camera to wind it on. So that's the normal process. It used to be the cable release. So now I thought of Connor, who I'd got to know well, and I knew his work, and I thought, well, maybe I can ask him, but I was totally sort of embarrassed, because you do feel like a bit of an idiot maybe doing, if somebody had come across in the woods and I'm jumping around and doing this thing and taking a photograph and stuff. But I'd seen his work and I knew he'd be comfortable with it. But again, asking a really good photographer not to really intervene and just press the button was a big ask as well. But there were several images where Connor did very subtly direct me, without it going into this conventional pose, but just, he'd be so good and say, and even show me, because when you wouldn't say, put your arm, I think you'd say, or the way you phrased it, say, make that arm long or something, for that one down on the Heron Rocks. And so it worked really well. And, many of the images, like the solar sauna, like Ascension, or ones that were in a longer distance, would have actually been impossible without Connor on this occasion. So, and the story that I've been telling everybody, for example, with the glyph and the lights, is I saw that up on the mountain and really loved it. Didn't have so there's a lot of walking without my camera, just looking for those. I suppose the longest stretch I ever had here was 4 months in a row, and another winter too. So walking and looking, and then I couldn't find it again. Basque test tube, furry freak. 4 dead aliens, hours, and it's on Cliff Trail. It's still there. So
Is that figure behind the black? It looks like
no, I do have one.
where I was standing back there, but I felt I didn't need it in the end. Was it Kim? Was it you that said it looked like an evil bunny, the black thing? Was that somebody else? It wasn't you.
No, it looks like a dance, black. Someone who's been dressed in black dance.
But it's a very, like you're talking about childhood, the whole landscape, especially with the petroglyphs as well, that kind of, it's that full of animism. You know, to me it is like everything is alive, and is that the right word? Anthropomorphic, you know, with the rocks especially, so it's definitely a living landscape.
Something you didn't know. I have to.
I'm fine. I think I spilled some of it.
Not playing anything. So I'm from Montreal. Well, I think it's
Yes, the paparazzi has arrived.
He's been here all night.
Completely in love, especially with the sunset. But I didn't realise how the colours get brighter. Obviously the clouds. Actually, it was Kit Williams when we did the filming. It started raining, and I thought, oh God, no, it's bad. And he said, no, but look at all the colours. And they actually pop more when there's cloud cover. And obviously the sun, because I think ages ago when I photographed here, I was cycling to Whaling Station, waiting for the sun, and the cloud came, and I was really chasing the sun. But realising that, you know, the arbutus on a day, cloudy day, that red, also if it's been raining, it's much stronger than actually trying to shoot it in the summer. So that was a really new discovery for me, the winter, that you don't need the bright sun, lots of correct the colours. But I think there's less creativity in colour printing in black and white. Because in black and white you can interpret, you know, shades of grey, you can have this side dark and black, and for colour for me it's either too blue, too green or too pink. You're just trying to get it, you know, skin tones correct in a sense. I don't think you can really play with that in the same way as black and white. But going back to the childish thing, I was
There you go.
And there's furniture and everything, I found it very oppressive. But going back to the side of childhood, and I was at the college and listening to lectures all at, I was thinking about this metaphors of childhood, and again sort of this childish mapping of space and playing. And so as much as I didn't like the place, I was looking to find it beautiful in a way, getting very into it. Because beauty, that was all our lectures were sort of about beauty that semester, I think, and you know there was a book written about you know, conceptual art was really, really trendy and, you know, obviously important, but people were being dismissive about beauty, and we had a tutor that said actually beauty in itself is it's much more complicated than anybody would think when you start looking. There's beauty and horror, you know, love, hate, all of those things that can be quite or be uncanny, or the spaces of childhood or surreal kind of things.
She was doing backstage. She was new to her instrument, and I was feeling raw by what she was doing. It's just she wasn't. The ears were not big. You know, it wasn't.
She sleeps in there.
Very nice.
Yeah, it was a
Nice spot.
So, I just, it was like nails on a chalkboard for me, and she came every single day for months. We had set out
I'm wondering, I'm curious, does this mean, is Hornby continuing to be your subject?
That's a really good question. Well, I've just come, I mean, this was a really nice excuse to come back again to do the show, and I'm always inspired here. You know, the curator that I noticed, he said, that work's finished now, the book is closed, do something else, you need a new work now and everything. And I can get a bit flippant even when I was at home with, I'll probably photograph most places, you know, because I stalked these places for a long time. But there's so much more. I mean, that's each visiting again, you just think, I'm just amazed how much coming here has to offer. I want to do portraits.
And you have begun.
I have begun. And again, that sounds very, you know, it's something I think people have done here, people have recognised here, the amazing community and people here, and I've seen cards and things at the co-op where people have photographed people here. And so I never, you know, thought that that's what I do, but on this trip I've been really struck by wanting to take portraits of people here. So it'd be something quite different. It might be, I suppose it'd be veering towards more like the documentary of the other people. And it's interesting because the person as well in photographs, I mean there's a lot of growing up, you know, with kids and there's another artist I didn't mention, my local village, that always use local people. There's that whole artist-muse relationship in photography, and photography can be really predatory, or I call it cannibalistic. You know, documentary part, so much theory about that and ethics about that. It's always put me off portraiture, or even wanting to use a model, because I think, and then the models often give such a lot, they're performing, but then it's not, they don't have any credit, or
you're not
there's
things,
and it's almost, and I suppose what I was trying to say about Kit and there's another photographer in the village as well that photographed mainly young women all the time. And I thought, well, if they're using me, or you know, lots of people as their model, you can be your own model. It's sort of convenient too, but that was a sort of thing. And then becoming more self-conscious about wanting to point the lens at other people and take from them, and all of those things. But I think that's put me off before. So I think here would be a lovely place to develop a portrait practice. And two-way thing, a conversation, and people, and maybe people can pick their, you know, if they have amazing places too, or spots in the landscape.
But they feel really connected to you.
Yeah, I see. I'd really like it to be collaborative. Thanks so much. I think we should go.
Thank you.